Have you ever just stopped and thought about how the exact same words can mean completely different things, all depending on who's saying them and where they are? You know how one sentence can be this profound, life-changing thing for one person and just complete gibberish to someone else? Well, let's get into that puzzle. You see this communication gap maybe most clearly in the conversations between science and religion. Right? It often feels like they're not even in the same conversation. It's like they're playing two different sports on two different fields with totally different rule books. One team is all about empirical evidence and proof, and the other is talking about faith and belief. So what's going on here? Well, the answer might just come from a really fascinating idea from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein suggested we should think of these different ways of talking as language games. The scientific game, it has its own set of rules. It's all about evidence, reason, and its main goal is to describe the physical world. But the religious game, it's playing by a whole other set of rules. It's built on things like faith, community, and emotion. Its goal isn't necessarily to describe objective reality in that scientific way, but to express a whole way of life.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at Wittgenstein's own journey, because this big idea of his was a complete 180 from how he and a lot of other philosophers used to think about language.
See, early in his career, Wittgenstein had this thing he called the picture theory of meaning. He basically thought words worked like little pictures, that they got their meaning by directly pointing to some physical thing out in the world. But then he completely changed his mind. He realized no. That's not it at all. Language isn't about picturing physical reality. It's about being part of our social reality. And that brings us to the core of it all. A language game is basically any social thing we do that has rules. And here's the killer insight. Using words is a type of behavior. Just like any other action we take, the words we pick are shaped by the rules of whatever social situation we find ourselves in. And this is where the idea just clicks. I mean, think about it in your own life. The way you talk in a job interview is a completely different game from how you talk with your friends, right? In an interview, you're using formal language, you're following these professional rules. With friends, it's all casual slang and inside jokes. The words might be the same, but the game, the rules, and because of that, the meaning are totally different. Which all comes down to Wittgenstein's most famous piece of advice. Don't look for the meanings, look for the use. Meaning isn't some fixed dictionary definition that's stuck to a word. Meaning is what a word does when you use it inside a particular game. Okay, so let's take this whole framework and bring it back to religious language. If we apply this idea, then religion starts to look like its own unique and very powerful language game. And this gets right to the heart of the problem. You know, when critics like the philosopher A.J. Ayer called religious language meaningless, Wittgenstein would probably say they were making a huge mistake. They were trying to be the referee for the God game using the rulebook from the science game. It doesn't work. It's like yelling at a chess player for not scoring a touchdown. They're not even playing the same sport. Now, this idea actually has a name. It's called Wittgensteinian fideism. It's this view that faith is its own self-contained world, its own game, totally separate from the game of reason and evidence. And they don't have to justify each other, because they're not even playing by the same rules to begin with. And this isn't some brand new idea either. Way back in the 3rd century, the theologian Tertullian basically asked, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Separating Greek philosophy from Christian faith. Pascal made a similar point. This perspective really helps make sense of why, for so many believers, scientific evidence just can't prove or disprove their faith. They're simply operating in different worlds. Okay, but as neat and tidy as that sounds, this theory starts to run into some pretty serious problems. Because separating these games so cleanly, well, it doesn't always reflect how things work in the real world. So here's the first big challenge. If religious statements only get their meaning from inside the game, then what does a statement like God exists actually mean? Does it just mean, hey, I'm playing this game, I'm participating in this culture? This issue is called theological anti-realism, and it's a huge deal because most religious people would totally reject that idea. They'd argue that when they say God exists, they are making a claim about what is objectively, actually real, not just saying they're part of a club. And in fact, you see tons of hugely influential thinkers who have tried to do the exact opposite. They've tried to bridge the two games. You've got Thomas Aquinas using observations about the natural world to argue for God's existence. Or much more recently, the physicist John Polkinghorne, arguing that the laws of the universe look so perfectly fine-tuned for life that it points to a designer. These guys are deliberately playing on both fields at once. And that leads to a second, just as tricky, problem. If you can only really understand a language game from the inside by being a player, then how does anyone ever convert? How do you go from one religion to another, or from non-belief to belief? This problem, sometimes called conceptual relativism, suggests there's this massive divide. If the games are really as separate as the theory suggests, then having a real, genuine argument between a believer and a non-believer seems almost impossible. How can they find any common ground if they can't even agree on the basic rules of the conversation? So, where does that leave us? Is this whole theory a useful tool, or does it end up creating more problems than it actually solves? Let's try to balance the scales here and figure out what we should really take away from Wittgenstein's powerful idea. So on one hand, the theory does a brilliant job of explaining that feeling of disconnect between science and faith, and it perfectly shows why meaning depends so much on context. It even gives us a way to understand how different, even incompatible religions can exist side by side. But, on the other hand, it really struggles with those claims about objective truth. It has a tough time explaining conversion, and maybe it doesn't quite get the messy, overlapping way our social games just kind of bleed into each other in real life. In the end, the real value of the language games idea isn't that it gives us a final answer. It doesn't solve the debate between science and religion. No, its real power is that it reframes the whole question. It makes us shift from asking, is this statement true, to asking, what is the statement doing? What game are we even playing right now? And that shift in perspective, well, that brings this whole idea right back into our own daily lives. So, I'll leave you with this. What are the different language games that you play every single day? Think about it. At work, at home, when you're online, with different groups of friends. Just recognizing the rules of the game you're in, that might just change the way you communicate entirely.